In my opinion, a good activity has to be engaging. It may need to meet the objective, but it should attract students' attention and enthuse them about the production of language.
Well, I think a good classroom activity is one that really engages the students. Something really interesting. It personalizes it for the students, makes it relevant to maybe their personal lives and also especially their professional lives, because once they leave here, of course, they're going to go to a follow-on training military site. So something that can really help them succeed once they leave the school.
When I am considering what type of activity to make and wanting it to be good, I want to make sure that it is directly tied to a specific language objective. When students do the activity, we want to try to make it as real life situation as we can. Whether it be in listening, speaking, reading, or writing, if the student perceives the activity that they are doing to be personally beneficial in their lives, they will be much more motivated. And if you're motivated to learn something, then you will retain it better and you'll want to practice and use that skill in real life. We don't want to make activities just for the sake of activities. They should be perceived as useful.
And one thing being an ESP, when we develop a book, when we design a course, we've got to simulate, we have to not just have readings, authentic readings, authentic listening and so on, but also we have to have activities where it's hands-on training, where we try to simulate the training environment. So, for example, for aviation English or aircraft maintenance, there's a lot of, they use a walkie-talkie a lot. So for a number of our activities, we use two-way radios. And also at hangars, there's a lot of, the listening conditions are pretty rough. I mean, they, in the summertime, for example, it's very, very hot. It can be over 100 degrees, and the fans are these humongous fans are going really full blast, and then of course the noise of the jet engine, and that's a real and so we have to try to meet these adverse listening conditions. We will also, they'll use two-way radios. We'll have them in different rooms or in different parts of the building or even outside talking to each other, and we're not concerned about if there's noise in the background because that just simulates the environment they'll be used to. So in developing the materials, we have to think in terms of both language skills as well as hands-on activities where we try to simulate what they'll be doing.
Well, one type of activity that I like a lot are communicative activities, which replicate real communication as much as possible and in a safe place where the students can feel comfortable using realistic language. And so that spontaneity, I think, really makes an interesting activity that's going to be interesting for the students, and it's also going to lead to real learning opportunities, and it can even lead to some learning that's maybe not just the objective. Kind of bonus learning, something that arises during this spontaneous discussion or spontaneous activity that one student's having with another, and so they can find this other area that they need help in, or even discover something on their own. So I like that. I like real communication. I like the spontaneity and just the fact that it's unpredictable. It makes it more interesting, more fun for the students. And it can lead to a lot of good practice with them.
Good activity. I have 5 criteria that I look at when evaluating. I think everybody agrees it has to be engaging. If you don't have your audience's attention, you don't achieve your goal. So engaging activities basically means it's interesting to the audience or it's made relevant to them. And other factors you can modify for that is to have a variety of types of input, the kind of material you're presenting, and also different tasks that you're asking the students to do. So that's engagement, number one. Another criterion is accomplishing the language objectives. I think we always have to keep in mind that's our guidepost, that's what we're moving towards, and that's going to help us with assessment. So no matter what we do to make it exciting and varied, we want to keep our goals in mind. My third criterion is maintaining the appropriate level, and that including some spikes or challenges so that students can stretch. Appropriateness of the level. The fourth is adhering to the theme. So we've worked very much in levels 5 and 6 with the theme-based lessons, and I think we always want to be supporting the theme. An example of that is in book 33, they worked on leadership in the military capacity. So what we did in CBT was to also introduce leadership in the civilian environment. And then lastly, I have one that I think is really important, and it's really pertinent to CBT because we rarely develop just a single activity. We have a series, and I call it logical sequencing. That means moving from easier to more difficult tasks, going from receptive to productive skills. We have the 3 Ps: present, practice, and produce. And another element is using the same material to accomplish several tasks that build on one another. And we have a very good example of that from level 5, where we use the same audio briefing for 4 different tasks, and it's very nicely done. So that's an example of the logical sequencing. I think if your activities are based on these 5 criteria, you'll have something that's called, what I like to call, coherence. So everything works together nicely. You have your activities that are meeting goals, and it's kind of a smooth whole. And I think it will end up making sense to the developer, the instructor, and the student.
Okay. A good activity should certainly be interesting and engaging to the student. We would all agree with that. But I think we have to go a step further and really think in terms of making sure that your activity has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay, now what do we mean by that? The beginning of an activity, it doesn't have to be long, but it needs to provide some sort of context for the students so that they're not just dumped into this activity without really understanding what it's about or maybe the purpose of it. So the beginning of the activity can provide context. I think for adult learners, it can also maybe give them a rationale as to why they're doing this activity. Okay, doesn't have to be long. Okay, the middle of the activity is the core. That's usually the easiest part to write because that's usually what we're thinking of when we're planning the activity. But I would like to say that make sure that the core of your activity is very carefully sequenced and thorough. Make sure that what you're asking the student to do is very clear. And then finally, the end of the activity, again, this doesn't have to be long, but it should provide some sense of closure, and I think ideally it gives the student an opportunity to perhaps reflect on what they've learned, or even better, apply what they've learned to some other situation so that there's kind of an extension. And that really reinforces to the student that what they're learning is for a purpose. Okay, so again, think in terms of that beginning, middle, and end, but don't get bogged down. It doesn't mean each portion has to be long or complex.